We have Jal Irani of Edelweiss Securities joining in now with his view on the sort of trade that we've seen in these counters recently. Jal, thanks so much for joining in. RIL was actually on quite a run after we hit that record all-time high of 1,036. Just been declining steadily. We've lost about 7% if we talk about just the last 5 sessions alone. What usually, ahead of an event like the AGM, which is next week, we generally see an RIL continuing to see a run up. What are the factors that you're seeing play into the weakness we've seen for the last few sessions?
Well, very difficult to say what drives a stock in a very short term, because afraid I'm not a trader. However, perhaps given that Reliance is a bellwether index stock and globally we have seen ETF selling, perhaps that has been a key reason why the stock has declined. But to put it into a sort of relevant perspective, by far over a 1-year period, it's been one of the best performing index stocks. So roughly it is up about 40% year on year. So I wouldn't really worry about the short-term fluctuations. Yes, the one thing, if I may add, is that similar to, its annual general meeting is essentially on Thursday next week, and the market has got some very high expectations of the AGM, because what we had seen the last 2 AGMs were some big bang announcements, and the stock rallied very strongly after that. So I think the near-term volatility has got to do with that, where we are seeing high expectations this time around as well. The difference, in my opinion, is going to be this time that even if you get some significant announcements, the market is not necessarily going to react very positively, because the market is expecting a significant upside afterwards. So frankly, difficult to say what drives the stock in the near term.
All right, so could remain subdued then, at least in the run-up to that AGM on Thursday next week. Let me ask you then, you look at Reliance with a long-term view. Is the long-term story still intact for a counter like a Reliance? Obviously, this kind of the profit booking we've seen recently, we're still trading near all-time highs. In fact, even if it's the lowest that we are in the last 3 weeks, we're not too far from that 1,000 rupee per share mark. With a long-term view in mind, what are the key drivers really that you see for a Reliance? Any sort of targets that you're working with?
So I call Reliance GARP, growth at a reasonable price. It's essentially one of the few companies which presents you not only growth, significant growth, but also actually very reasonable valuations. So from a growth perspective, if you look at even the last 2-3 years, while the earnings of the Nifty stocks has been almost zero, Reliance's earnings growth has been about 15-20% every year. Even last year, I think the earnings growth was about 18%, and similarly the previous year. So it's growing. Even it's already growing. Now going forward, essentially Reliance has commissioned projects of about $50 billion versus its earlier projects, which were producing, earlier capacity was about $30 billion worth of capacity. Now, with such a significant amount of new projects which have gone from capital work in progress to producing assets, you're bound to see growth. And in fact, it is likely to be significantly profitable growth. So the 2 big buckets where you're seeing that it's invested, one is, of course, Reliance Jio, and the other is refining and petrochemicals. In Reliance Jio, barely at about 30% utilization of its total capacity, it's already making profits to that extent. So as it leverages up, as its operational leverage kicks in, it'll be making a lot more money. Similarly, in the petrochemical and refining business, essentially it has significantly backward integrated as well as added some very profitable new capacities, such as ethane imports from the US, where the IRRs are extremely high, and that is also going to add to a material amount of growth. So first point is that you have seen already growth, and more even stronger growth is poised to come through. Now the second thing is on valuations. Whichever way you slice it and dice it, Reliance's PR is about 12 times forward earnings. The market is little less than twice as much. Essentially, as the market becomes more confident of this growth, the stock is also being re-rated. So therefore, we call Reliance Industries GARP, growth at a reasonable price.
All right, growth at a reasonable price is the story for an RIL. You were talking about, on the energy side of things, there was a bit of that disappointment in terms of, their petco gasification units were still at a ramp-up stage in the fourth quarter. Are all the projects fully commissioned at the moment? Are they operating at full utilization? What is the expectation then if we talk about first quarter numbers?
So from Reliance's refinery/energy petrochemical projects of about $20 billion, they have commissioned already $15 billion. $15 billion of projects have already been commercially commissioned. Now this petcoke gasification, which is roughly about $5 billion, is under commissioning. What we understand is that out of the 10 units, 4 have been commissioned and 6 are in the process of being commissioned. Now this is potentially a very profitable project, but one must understand that these are very large, complex projects, and by far the petcoke gasification project almost single-handedly doubles the petcoke gasification capacity globally. So in the scale on which Reliance is actually doing this, and the complexity of the capacity itself is very significant. So from the $20 billion of projects, about $15 billion they have done, they have commissioned in effectively record time. This one is taking longer than expected. I would think that it would get commissioned, but we don't know exactly when that will happen.
All right, so timelines are uncertain, but whenever this comes on, we can expect good upside then in terms of their performance. What is the expectation on the GRMs front? Singapore GRMs have been under some pressure, but diesel cracks have been looking strong. For Reliance, how do you expect things to pan out? And overall then, are you expecting at least that we'll start off, the new fiscal year in terms of results on a stronger note? Will the June quarter be better than the March quarter?
So the GRMs haven't changed materially in this quarter so far. Last quarter was subdued and slightly subdued. So we expect the GRMs not to be dramatically different this quarter, maybe even slightly to that extent. However, what we expect is a fair amount of volume-driven growth, more on the petrochemical side than the refining side, because a lot of profitable capacities have come on stream on those levels. Essentially, for the refining business, especially on the GRMs, we are not expecting a meaningful shift into this quarter over the last quarter.
All right, I wanted to get your take on the kind of weakness that we've seen in the rupee today. Does this affect a company like an RIL or in the oil and gas space, the OMCs? How does this really play into it? What should we be bracing ourselves for? Because, of course, on the one side, we have crude spiking. Given the higher crude prices, is there any expectation that this will play into stronger petrochem performance for the first quarter? And on the other side of things, also there is the rupee.
Sorry, what would play into stronger petrochemical?
Both these forces of the kind of crude oil movement that we've seen since the last quarterly results, as well as the rupee hitting all-time lows against the dollar. Sure. Give us a sense really of what we should be expecting in terms of this playing through to financial results.
Sure. Sure. So essentially for Reliance Industries, a depreciating rupee is good because it's a dollar-based margin. We estimate that a 10% depreciation of the rupee tends to benefit it by about 7%. So that's a good thing. Similarly, for crude prices, it's also good for Reliance Industries because, 10% increase in crude prices similarly benefits by 7 or 8% to the bottom line because its spreads between raw material and products actually widen as crude prices actually go up. So it net should be good for Reliance Industries on both counts.
All right, so expect then at least these factors that have the markets under a lot of pressure will perhaps be good news for an RIL going forward. We leave it at that, Jal. Thanks so much for joining in, sharing your perspective on what's going on at Reliance Industries. Short term, we're seeing a lot of weakness, but the long term story is intact. That's the view there from Jal Irani of Edelweiss Securities.